Hello, my name is Tina and welcome to the Star Wars Connection. I am here with Lee and Denise. Today we are going to be covering Reylo 101 about the potential love story between Rey and Kylo Ren and what a large segment of the audience see and did not pick up in The Force Awakens.
And we're also going to talk about all the controversy and the negative reactions, and then talk a little bit of how it was to be part of this fandom.
Going into this topic, there were a lot of pre-existing expectations before The Force Awakens even came out in regards to the new cast, especially Rey.
I was hanging around in the Star Wars fandom a little bit, and it's a huge thing. People have been waiting for this for 30 years, and it was very strong. One, people that wanted her to be a Skywalker because they were Luke fans or they expected that. And they were really angry at anyone that thought that would not be true, or even angry at anyone who thought she would be a Solo, because it's not a Solo saga and Leia is not really a Skywalker and things like that. And there was another thing, it was about Finn, that you had the people who were really happy that finally we had a black lead in Star Wars, which is amazing, and they were upset if anyone didn't think that it would be, that he would be the lead or Force sensitive. People were getting at each other's throats already before The Force Awakens.
And I was gonna say Rey, a lot of people thought that she couldn't be random because it wasn't Star Wars.
I think people were expecting her to be definitely Luke's daughter from early on, even before they knew anything about the movie. I think going into the movie as a Star Wars fan, I started out assuming that it was going to be Luke's kid. And as I watched the movie, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what we're getting. But the assumption was complete. Yeah, and I think most of the people had that same experience.
Yeah, I had read the whole plot and I thought she would be a Solo because I thought it would be very sad to find a father and to lose a father. And I thought it didn't make sense. If her problem was the lack of a family, it would not make sense to solve the protagonist problem in the end of the first act. It turns out that it is about her finding a father figure, but it's not biological.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. As far as Luke, it never really crossed my mind because Luke is a Jedi and he seems, to be one of those good boys that follows the rules, especially in regards to attachment. And Star Wars isn't exactly a saga where children are born outside of wedlock. It's just not part of that genre. So my feeling was, and this is why I caught on, to this potential love story between the villain and the heroine, is because I didn't have any preconceived notions about Rey being attached to any character biologically.
Yeah, but most people who saw it said, oh no, I don't think she's related. But then some people really they wanted so much that they kept thinking and they kept looking at it. So when The Force Awakens came out, I thought, I saw Kylo and the way he looks at her, and I thought, I don't think they're siblings, no way.
Yeah, you guys remember what was the moment where you started thinking, wait a minute? Because for me, it was, to be honest with you, I was looking forward to them meeting even before anything had really happened, just because I thought they're obviously the two most interesting characters. So I'm like, oh, that's going to be interesting when they meet up. But the whole thing about what girl, I think that was kind of when I perked up a little bit. I'm like, why is he so invested in this? And then the moment that they met in Takodana, there was just something about the setup that seemed kind of like fairy tale-ish to me. And then I saw him looking her up and down, and then I saw him sweeping her off her feet and carrying her off, and I was like, that doesn't happen between cousins and brother and sister. So I kind of started paying more attention after that. And then definitely in the interrogation scene, pull this Luke and Leia making out, and then it turns out that they're twins. I don't think they're gonna do that deliberately. We know that happened by accident in the original trilogy. So I thought really they're putting all these messages to let us know that these people are not related.
Yeah, I think I should have noticed in the international trailer when he pulls his big red lightsaber close to her face. It's super symbolic.
Yeah.
And God, you can't do that.
I watched TFA this morning with my husband and and even my husband, who's the most non-shipper person in the world, was giggling.
So it was there, right? Everybody noticed. And then the next question is, oops, where is this gonna go, right? And then that's the thing when people started asking, there's maybe something there. And that's when the Rey Skywalker came back and people were like, no way, they're related. That's disgusting to think that there is anything about them, because they had these expectations and they were still seeing and wishing and hoping that she would be Luke's daughter.
Like I said, I never thought they were related. I had no preconceived notions, making me more open to the idea. I did during the interrogation think that she got off a little easily compared to Poe, and I was like, well, that's different. Something's going on here, but it didn't click with me quite yet exactly what it was. It was in the final snow scene where he offers to be her teacher, and it wasn't even that moment. That moment threw me off, but it was the camera angles that kind of like hit me in the face with the choker shots, with those two being compared, you know, basically like just outside of like lip to lip pretty much. You know, they're staring at each other. She's got this look of ecstasy on her face, and these camera angles are known, I've seen them used before in other genres with the same type of premise between two potential lovers that are on opposite sides, where it kind of portrays them being, you know, obviously they're going to have a very different relationship from what they have today. And that was when it hit me in the face, and I remember my thought being, oh my God, with him? Because, you know, there's going to be a central romance, and obviously, you know, she, the heroine, you know, going back to the heroine's journey, has that kind of a romantic arc, but you just don't know who it's going to be with. And I remember thinking, with him, those were the two words that kind of went through my head. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be great. And I got really excited, went online the next day, you know, to see like if anybody else had caught it too. And I was like bombarded with, oh my God, are they related? Like, what? Where did this even come from? Him being the only Skywalker child kind of sealed that in for me. But, you know, again, no one seemed to talk about that.
I had the same experience in terms of like leaving the theater. I was just so conflicted. I was confused. I'm like, because like I said, I'd gone in with this assumption that Rey's going to be Luke's daughter. So obviously she and Kylo Ren have to be related. And then I noticed all these elements and a sexual tension that was kind of cool and exciting. I really like chemistry between people. That's one of the things that I love about cinema, is just exploring conflicted relationships. So I'm very attuned to noticing and picking up on those kinds of things. But then I thought maybe I'm just reading too much into this. And so I went online, and that's when I first came across this term Reylo. Already somebody had come up with the word, and we're talking like a day after it had been released. Yeah. So I'm not the only one. I'm not going crazy. Other people noticed it too. And then we just started talking about it, and the conversation continued for months, and it's still going on. But I was surprised by the backlash, and also surprised in a way how people felt guilty for noticing that, and people said that they were trash, and then kind of nicknamed themselves a trash ship because people thought they're still related, so this is wrong to be noticing this. But the more we analyzed it, the more it felt like, no, they're really not related. And I think things that have come out since have kind of confirmed that, as far as I'm concerned anyway. I think there's still people out there who are gunning for even Rey Solo, which is like, wow. But
yeah. I'm definitely of the mind, as far as them being related, that was debunked with the night of Reygate. And if anybody's not familiar with Reygate, I'll give a breakdown, because I'm telling you, this was my favorite night of the fandom. It was on a Friday night in late April 2016. This is how much it's my favorite. J.J. Abrams, during some sort of convention, a little kid asked him, who are Rey's parents? And he said, I don't know yet. That hasn't been explained, but we do know that Rey's parents were in TFA. Well, this caused basically a storm to ignite, because obviously Leia and Luke were both in TFA. That right there was enough to put that under, but it wasn't even that. It was the reaction of the story team to that quote that really sealed the deal. So you have Pablo Hidalgo getting on Twitter, and if anybody's not familiar with Pablo Hidalgo, he's part of the story team as far as, you know, syncing up things, making sure canon facts don't conflict with each other. He goes on Twitter and he says, we know that Kylo Ren is a Skywalker, right? And it had kind of this panicked undertone to it, but also amusement. Like, finally the cat's out of the bag and I can talk about this. And then, on top of that, you have Daisy Ridley going on Instagram, going into the Reylo tag with like a little kitty cat emoji going, what does it all mean? And then, of course, we know JJ had this like half-hearted retraction afterwards that, you know, was kind of comical in itself, because it still didn't say that Luke is Rey's father. It never came out and said that. It just said, we know that her parents weren't explained in TFA. That doesn't mean they're not in her universe. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, and even now, like in the celebration, they were almost joking about Rey Skywalker, right? So I think it's being more and more debunked.
Right.
Another thing to mention is that JJ has done his director's commentary on the process of filming and how the scenes came out. And and he specifically mentioned about when Leia and Rey meet and they embrace. He says, I'm going to read his direct quote, "This moment, I think, is actually lovely, and the idea that these two women who'd never met, and they're both Force strong, and they're both bound by their loss and their strength." So basically he's saying that Leia and Rey have never met. So that's like outright debunking that Rey is a solo. And then he also commented on how Kylo Ren and Rey had never met. And then he talked about on Rey's belonging, a sense that she wants to go back to Jakku and that she's seeking a belonging, waiting for her family. He says specifically, "She feels like the only belonging she's ever going to have is her family, and if she leaves, she'll never get a chance to see them. There's a very powerful idea that what she desperately wanted was belonging, which she'll get, but not how she's expecting." So, I mean, that to me sounds pretty clear. He's saying she's gonna belong, but not with her family. And she already met up with Luke at the end of The Force Awakens. So I feel like there's been a lot of wishful thinking that has clouded, I think, people to some extent, to where they're hanging on to this idea of Rey as a Skywalker or as a solo, even to this day after all of this information. Now, I think that Lucasfilm also has a lot of responsibility here because they're giving mixed messages. Even the actors, like when Mark made a joke at Celebration about Daisy being his daughter, and people are like, yeah, you see, he's saying that she's a Skywalker. It's like people would just hang on to crumbs to really try to keep this going that she's a Skywalker.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, as far as like Celebration, I was sitting there in the audience laughing because I'm like, God, can they drill home this idea anymore? Mark Hamill is not going to make a mistake like that. It was clearly a joke and people were taking it seriously.
We've been kind of wondering about why are they doing this? Why are they not outright saying, you know, guys, she's not a Skywalker, she's not a solo. And part of the reason I think is basically that they're trying to, aside from the fact that it'll keep people talking about it and keeps a certain level of interest and mystery, I think it also is very protective of Kylo Ren's arc. And we have speculated that a big twist in the sequel trilogy, one of the twists is going to be that, guess what, he's probably going to be redeemed. Things are pointing strongly in that direction. And I think a lot of people think that's like impossible. Oh, there's no way that he can ever turn back after what he did, right? But if you think about him as the only Skywalker left, then the stakes go up for his character's value. And then it becomes clear that, yeah, most likely he will end up being redeemed. They're not going to kill off the last Skywalker, let him die evil. Then it becomes kind of like, wait a minute, so maybe he will have a love interest. So then you can kind of put things together and it becomes more obvious. So I think in a way they're trying to preserve that twist, and maybe that's why they've allowed this speculation to continue in that way.
Yeah. Speaking of trying to preserve it, can we talk about Finn and the misdirection? Because I think, the other big accusation people got was when people noticed, there might be something happening between Kylo and Rey, that we're being racist, because they thought Rey was obviously Finn's love interest. A lot of it was because of the marketing, because how he was marketed, not as one of the leads, but maybe as the lead. And I find that a lot of people actually thought that Finn would be one of the protagonists in equal standing to Rey. And if you think of that from Finn's point of view, it kind of makes sense that he would kind of get the girl, and then they were angry at us.
Yeah, I think that The Force Awakens also kind of set that up. Like, I was one of those people, I was watching The Force Awakens and I was like, oh, so I guess Finn and Rey are going to be a thing, because, they're running together and he's taking her hand and they're cute and sweet together. But then when I noticed all this stuff with Kylo Ren, I'm like, okay. So I think a lot of people left the theater thinking that Finn and Rey were definitely going to be a couple, and a lot of people were expecting Finn to be the main protagonist. A lot of people still argue that he is going to be the Jedi, because the promotional material showing him with the lightsaber for The Force Awakens, and that he is the awakening. So I think when you put those expectations up against people saying, well, no, the real romance here is between Kylo Ren and Rey, I think that made a lot of people feel angry. But I just find it so offensive when people say that if you are wanting Rey and Kylo Ren to be together, then you're racist, because you only want them together because you don't want her to end up with the black guy. I mean, that's so ridiculous and offensive. And I mean, you can like Reylo and also like Finn. In fact, a lot of us do, but we're just kind of going by what the story's saying. And to me, the story's not saying Finn and Rey, and it's not saying that Finn is the main protagonist. Doesn't mean that he's not important and that he's not going to have an awesome arc.
I agree. As far as the racism accusations, that kind of caught me out of left field, of like, out of all the things I've I've experienced in the fandom. And the marketing team from Lucasfilm has not been exactly subtle in hitting us over the head that Finn is going to be getting a new love interest of his own with Kelly Marie Tran, who will be playing a character that we learned at Celebration by the name of Rose. I was really excited about that. I think the actress that plays her, she is just a doll. She's cute as a button, and I'm really excited to hear more about her. There was also something that we like to call in the fandom Boyega Gate, where somebody had asked Finn if he was that, you know, I can't wait to see the romance between Rey and Finn. And he's like, wait a second. He's like, that's not how. He's like, I'm telling you, that's not how the romance is going to go. And this person actually, if I remember right, got a little snippy. He said, wait, have you read the script? And as tight as Lucasfilm is on the spoilers that they release, I really think that was planned. And they were actually using John Boyega to say those words because, you know, coming from him, obviously, I think that's going to have more of a bite than if it were to come from any other actor. So I definitely think that was heavily planned. But again, you know, when that came out, I was pretty excited. I had a big smile on my face.
I think that was planned. It's good to remember that Kelly had been cast in December before The Force Awakens came out. So a romance between Finn and Rey was definitely not planned. But as to people getting angry, I actually understand. And I think what they did with him was really wrong. You know, they say this is not a toy commercial. Well, it is. Kids are buying toys. Kids are buying Finn Jedi toys and going to the movies. And, you know, kids, maybe 20-year-old kids are coming back home disappointed. And I'm angry. I'm super angry, you know. I just try to imagine the face of a kid who thought, you know, I can't, it breaks my heart. I'm not gonna die, but it breaks my heart to think about it. And I think it's really wrong. And I definitely understand why people are angry. But just because we see what's in the movie doesn't mean it's our fault, you know. But I definitely understand why people are angry, and I think what was done with him was really wrong. The fact that he's not force sensitive and that he's just one of the leads is not a problem. He would be like Han Solo, who's super awesome, but then when you have expectations and he doesn't meet them, then people are gonna be disappointed and people are gonna be angry, and I understand that people are angry.
Yep, exactly. Going back, you know, we've been accused of promoting these things like racism, the incest argument, which I believe that's been dead and buried and debunked as far as Rey being blood related to any of the Skywalker family. Now, going back, there's also something else they bring up. They bring up the abuse angle.
Basically, people are saying, well, how can Rey ever reciprocate Kylo's feelings when he physically and mentally abused her? Which, what? Did we watch the same movie? The interrogation scene where he did capture her, he kidnapped her, he locked her up and tied her up. Yeah, but in what context did that happen? It's not like Kylo Ren was out on a date with Rey and decided to kidnap her and tie her up. It's not like they were in a social setting or they had an established relationship. The context really matters here, and the fact that they are both essentially on opposite sides during a war, and he takes her as a prisoner so that he can interrogate her. He uses his ability to extract knowledge from her mind. It's not something that he's doing just for fun. In fact, in the novelization, he makes clear that he doesn't enjoy doing that to her. So to make that leap and say that he's abusing her and to completely ignore the context, I think is just totally misrepresenting what is occurring in the scene. And I think it's unfair to say that anybody who enjoyed that scene or who enjoys the thought of the possibility of a romance between Kylo and Rey is encouraging violence against women, and that's accusations that we hear all the time. And then, of course, the tree, the infamous tree, where when they're facing off just before that snow fight, he throws her up against the tree so that he can focus on dealing with Finn. So that has caused a huge controversy, and people have found a way to make any supporter of this pairing, and even people who don't support the pairing but who see it as a possibility, to make them sound like the degenerate people, twisted people, and S&M supporters and all this stuff. It's like, how did you make that leap? I mean, I think a lot of the criticism against the pairing comes from that and from messages of, oh, if you're supporting this, then you're saying that it's okay for women to let men beat them up in real life. There's a lot of leaps that have taken place here.
Yeah, I think so too. And also, I read a novelization that has like an old version of the script. And when they first meet in the forest, he says, "You would kill me, knowing nothing about me." And then later he says, "So afraid. Yes, I should be the one who should be afraid." You shot first. It is I who was forced to defend myself against you. And it's true, even in the
It
tree,
is true.
she's the one who shoots first.
Yeah, she is the one who always shoots first.
Yeah.
Both times. I mean, the reason he threw her into a tree is because she pulled a blaster on him. In the forest, she's shooting at him and he's deflecting her blaster shots with his lightsaber. So, yeah, absolutely. She is the one that shoots first every time. I mean, I want to like make a, there's the controversy about Han shot first. There's the controversy about Rey shot first.
Yeah. Well, let's look a little bit about what actually happens in the scene. So we have the script here, and we're just going to go through some of the key points. Starting at Starkiller Base holding cell. Rey wakes disoriented. She is startled to see Kylo Ren, mask in place, standing there. Where am I? You're my guest, he replies. So, okay, first of all, you're my guest. That doesn't sound very abusive to me.
It doesn't sound very threatening.
No. And then, she mentions the mask. He says, you still want to kill me? And she replies, that happens when you're being hunted by a creature in a mask. Kylo Ren stops, considers her, reaches up, unlatches, and removes his mask. Rey reacts stunned. It takes a moment before she regains her own mask of defiance. Then they continue the conversation, tell me about the droid, all that stuff. And he says, I can take whatever I want. Trepidation flashes across Rey's eyes. Kylo Ren moves closer, his hand racing towards her. She recoils, but has nowhere to go. Kylo Ren nearly touches her face. So I think that this is the piece where a lot of people felt offended because they thought, obviously he's doing all these things to her against her will. And a lot of people perceived that there was a sexual undertone in the dynamics between them. I mean, there's a heartbeat in the background. There's that intense eye contact. There's this kind of he's going into her, she's going into him. There's an intimacy.
And the heavy breathing, too.
Exactly. Yes. Heavy breathing, panting, gasping, heartbeat in the background. He is in her mind, she's in his mind, and that's very intimate. So yeah, there are some sexual elements here, but people really latched on to him saying, I can take whatever I want, and ended up calling Kylo a rapist. Like, again, the leaping and kind of taking things totally out of context. I think that they made some decisions in the filming to ensure that we perceived that there was an intimacy going on here that was totally unexpected. Like, they could have shot that scene with him masked and it would have been a completely different vibe. But the fact that he unmasked for her, he's revealing himself to her. And here they are connected in this intimate way where something passes between them. I'll go from what it says in the script. They're both surprised. They react to a feeling that passes between them. And this is all caps. An energy they recognize in each other. And then it's gone. Adversaries again.
Yeah, so you cannot say that the intention of the creators was to portray abuse. But I have a little problem with that, with the scene, because I think she trembles and quivers in a moment when he's going there. And I find that some people see it and they think that she's being tortured. And what I find is that it's a little confusing because this scene, the way it is, it has two tropes. One trope is the hero against the villain, and the villain is usually defiant. That's actually what we have. She is defiant. And you also have the second trope that is like the monster with the damsel, like King Kong and the girl. It's just, she's usually not scared and she doesn't shake and doesn't quiver. She realizes she is safe and she's okay. The other trope that people mistake that's the case here is the damsel in distress. The damsel in distress is going to show physical signs of her distress. So people who already thought Finn was the protagonist, there's that confusion, and see that her quivering and think, oh, she's in distress and she needs to be saved. But I don't think it was meant to be perceived like that. I understand how people perceive like that, but I don't think that was the intention.
To counter that, though, and like I said, I actually watched TFA this morning, so it's fresh in my head. When I watched that scene again, I've noticed that Rey begins to cry when he's pulling up her painful memories to the top of her head. Now, that's kind of where I think the writers were going as far as, her memories. She's not crying because of him. She's crying because all these memories of being abandoned and being alone, not being able to sleep, that's all being pulled to the top of her mind, and that's why she's crying.
Yeah,
but
there's also the fact that it is painful to resist against what Kylo Ren is doing to get into her mind. And I think that comes across in the script too. As far as Rey, in the beginning, she's afraid. But after they start talking, you have the sense that she's really just defying. So she's not quivering and whimpering in fear during his mind probe. She's really resisting with everything she's got. And that causes, her to feel what they call agony in the script. So I'm going to read from the script again. So it says, Rey can't move quietly strains in agony, trying to resist Ren's probing. So because she's trying to resist, she's panting and making these noises and quivering and all that. But a lot of people thought that, oh, he's doing this to her because he's torturing her. And no, he's trying to get information. Now, something interesting happened there, which is in the beginning, he was just trying to get the map. And then he was just kind of looking into her and trying to like understand what he was seeing, and that's when he starts to talk about desperate to sleep, you imagine an ocean. So there's a dynamic that's changing. Like things start out one way, and as it progresses it becomes something else entirely.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the tears. There is a little bit of embarrassment from her part, and it is actually in the novelization. He asks, "Really, are you a scavenger?" And then it says she didn't respond, and perhaps sensing her embarrassment, he changed the subject. And she wasn't embarrassed in front of Finn, in front of Hans. Yeah, I'm just a scavenger. And now she's embarrassed in front of him.
Yeah, why is she embarrassed in front of him?
Ooh, and why does he not want her to be embarrassed? Like, he changes the subject right away because he doesn't want to embarrass her. That doesn't sound like torture.
No. I was also thinking too, and maybe this is me coming out of left field, but if you look at the interrogation through a Reylo lens, at least for me, what's supposed to be a very serious scene, part of it is actually kind of comical. So you start out with Rey being strapped to a chair, her asking him where her friends are, and he says, I have no idea, meaning, they're probably safe. But then he's surprised that she still wants to kill him because he thinks he's done her a huge favor, but he's so terrible with women that he fails to remember he had her strapped to a chair. So
it's hurt, right? It's really sad.
His feelings are hurt. So poor guy. And then he says, tell me about the droid. She starts going into BB-8 specs because, she's just hilarious like that. Well, he's duly impressed, so he wants to one-up her by impressing her even more with his access to the Empire archives. He's just bragging about that. And she's trying not to look at him, even though, she can't stop staring at him for, take your pick of reasons. And she gets caught looking at him twice up and down. And then, of course, we know what happens from there with the heavy breathing and, moving slowly up the arms from one person to another. It's just, if you look at it through that romantic lens, it just, it takes on a whole different spin.
I think they included a lot of the cues in that scene that are sending you the messages that there's something going on here that is different from what you thought going in. Like her looking at him, I love that because I actually noticed that in Titanic between Jack and Rose when they first meet. I don't know if you guys remember the scene, but Jack is staring up at her. She's like at the top of the deck and she sees him looking at her and then she quickly looks away and then she can't help it and she looks right back at him. So I saw Rey doing that with Kylo Ren, and if you look at JJ's commentary when he's describing the unmasking, he describes Adam Driver looks like a prince in this scene. So, I mean, what are they trying to tell you here?
Yeah.
If you look at all the...
I'm sorry. I was going to say, going back to that commentary, though, as far as J.J. Abrams, he also says these two will have a very interesting relationship moving forward. So he doesn't have to drive that point home to me. I believe him.
So I just wanted to add about the interrogation scene. I think to me that's one of the more powerful scenes in the movie because of everything that's going on. There's so many layers to it. And I think that they may have made a mistake and maybe like you said, Denise, and how they portrayed Rey, or I think they really tried to make it clear, but there is a lot of room for interpretation. So I can understand why there is some controversy. But for me, the main thing that I got out of this was all of my expectations were subverted as I started watching the scene and things started to unfold. Like in the beginning, Rey is very much captured. She's at his mercy. She's tied up. But by the end of that scene, she's the one who's emerging as the victor. So she's the one who is dominating Kylo Ren. She gets into his mind. She exposes his deepest insecurity, and she's the one that's more powerful. He leaves there all shaken up with his tail between his legs. And then she's empowered after that because then she can discover something that she didn't know about herself and use it to help herself. She auto-rescues. She doesn't need anybody to come in and save her from Kylo. She does it herself. JJ describes how Rey basically uses what she learned after interacting with Kylo Ren in order to free herself. And he says, after being in such a powerful mind, she realizes that she can probably take this stormtrooper and get him to release her, and she does. It's a learning experience. They learn about each other. They establish a connection. And there's a dynamic that's established there where Rey is the more dominant one. And we see that kind of hold up throughout the rest of their interactions in The Force Awakens. I mean, it started out from the beginning when she says kind of like, I don't like your mask. off it comes. And then later on, when they're in the duel, in the snow fight, he defers to her many times. First of all, he didn't kill her. He could have easily. He didn't even try to. He gave her time to power up, to go Super Saiyan on him. And he offers to teach her. You can tell that he's just drawn to her, and she's the more dominant between the two. So I really like it. It started out one way. It ended up something completely different.
Yeah, on this thing, I just want to say that the interrogation scene is actually exactly in the middle of The Force Awakens. And in many scripts, not all, you have a scene that's called the midpoint. The midpoint is when things turn around. Quite a few movies have it. So that's where everything kind of changes directions and all your interpretations should change. And that's interesting. And also, I think for people who still interpret it as abuse, I think it's important to remember that Kylo is not a real person. He didn't do anything. He's a character. So at this point, we have to look at the creator's intentions, and from the commentary, from everything, we don't think that JJ is trying to portray abuse there.
Exactly. And keep in mind, too, that epic love stories are not representative of real life relationships. They've all got these fairy tale elements, which is actually something that I love about Reylo. As far as it's got that same Beauty and the Beast kind of parallel, where the Beast starts out, you're not even sure if he's human, and then in the end, he has this great redemption arc and ends up with a girl. It's kind of the same thing. And I don't even know, that many Reylos who see, a relationship between the two without either character evolving. That's something we've always been accused of, as far as we just like these dark romances a la 50 Shades of Grey. That's not representative of what we're really seeing at all. People misconstrue that a lot.
I think it's too bad that some people want to look at Rey like a victim in this scenario. I think that the movie went pretty far to establish that Rey is a very powerful woman, and that Rey and Kylo are on equal footing in many ways in terms of the Force, in terms of their dynamics. Rey, like we said, she can shoot at stormtroopers without knowing them, shoot to kill, just because they're on opposite sides of where her loyalties stand. So Kylo and Rey were in that opponent dynamic, and Rey, she wrecked him. She beat him up, and then she cut his face out of pettiness. So that's not abuse. Nobody talks about her abusing Kylo. Yeah. Why? Because she's a woman and he's a guy. I think there's some underlying kind of inverted sexism there that people don't talk about. They only want to kind of portray Kylo as an abuser of Rey because of how things started out between them, and he's a guy and she's a girl. I think if we look at the scene objectively, you can see that they're definitely set up as equals in a war situation, and there's no reason to expect that dynamic of kind of fighting each other and him doing things to her against his will and her going and beating him up. We don't expect that to continue into their relationship. They're not in a relationship, and things will change between them. I think the movie is doing a good job of setting that dynamic up.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I honestly think that the powers that be thought this was going to be more obvious than what I've seen, from the general audience's reaction. Now, of course, I have talked to some general audience members that have seen it yeah, I think you're onto something. And I've talked to other audience members that are like, what are you talking about?
Personally, when I talk about people that are not invested in it, they've all seen something, they see something. They might think that Endgame is going to be Finn and Rey, but everybody has seen something and noticed that he's interested in the girl, because it's clear, right?
Yeah. So I took my mom to see it, I want to say a month after it had come out. And my mom, she and I both grew up on soaps, and she saw the same exact thing I saw, and we both kind of fell into it together. She signed up for Tumblr, and we were sending each other memes and just laughing our butts off about just everything that would come out. Because there were some really funny things on Tumblr for a while.
Well, I can tell you that as far as my experience of talking with people who aren't really hardcore fans, if they didn't notice something between Rey and Kylo when you suggest it, then they go, oh, that would actually be kind of cool. They see it as something interesting. They don't see it as something repugnant and morally bankrupt. So I think that's been my
experience too.
Yeah, there's a big backlash against Reylo, the word, the fandom, the girls behind it, because everybody assumes that it's all women who support the pairing or who see it as a possibility, which is not the case. And I think that clouds the vision sometimes, more so than these two characters finding common ground and maybe developing romantic feelings for each other. In terms of why people don't want it or why they criticize it, one of the things is that people think of Rey as somebody who doesn't need a romance. She's a strong character, and then somehow the romance is going to weaken her or portray her as somebody with a less epic arc. I wonder if that has to do with Luke. Luke did have a romantic interest in Leia in the beginning, but then when he found the Force, that became his main thing. thing. So people want her to be as much as possible like Luke.
I would say no.
Right? And then they say, oh,
Yeah.
she doesn't need a romance. But I find that like kind of offensive, honestly, because you can be a competent, successful woman and still have romantic aspirations.
Absolutely.
And Star Wars is an epic story, and that includes love. So I don't see that argument. I really don't follow.
A lot of people think that they love, strong, independent female characters that don't have romance, like Ripley from Alien or the Bride from Kill Bill. And that's not really the story that's involved here. When you have an epic story that has one or more core families involved, like the Skywalkers, how do you think those families continue? They continue through romance. I mean, I don't think I need to get into like the birds and the bees here, but
Well,
it's got to continue somehow.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they want her to be like Luke, because most people who are against it want Rey Skywalker, because they want to know that Luke had the family. They want, him to have a love story and to be happy. So that's not true. I think it's really because women have for so long been restricted to the role of love interest that it's good when you have a woman that's a hero. But she's not only the love interest; she has her arc, and it's not fair because most male characters in adventure and fantasy, they all get the girl, why does it have to be different with women? So I think it's a double standard there.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think even like they say, oh, we don't want it to be a love story, because if you would have the villain and the hero with a love story, it puts it in a central place, right? But it has been in a central place for many movies, and I think if it's done well, it can work really well and it can be really great.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think one thing else that I wanted to note is that there is this thing that they think because they think it's only women and that they're seeing things because it's based on our own sexual romantic desires, whatever, which is, I think it's very unfair. Like nobody has ever been shamed because they have the hots for Leia in a bikini, and nobody's been shamed because they identify with Finn and they're very angry that he's not gonna get the girl because they have the hots for Rey, which is absolutely fine. I mean, it should not be ridiculed and mocked for that. But suddenly when it comes to women, they think first it's because of our desires, and they even think it's our personal desires in real life. Well, this is not real life. Nobody would like to see the charred bodies of their family and have their hands cut off by their father, but everyone wants to be Luke Skywalker. It's not real, it's not fantasy, and there's this double standard. Oh, women, they're seeing it because he looks good. Well, who made him look good?
Who made him look good?
Like,
who
seriously.
gave him that freaking hair?
Yeah.
Come on. I know this isn't really a spoiler episode that we're doing, but the marketing for him, as far as The Last Jedi, he looks ethereal. They even, Rian Johnson even admitted through a tweet that he changed the scar and moved it over a bit to improve the way he looked. And he looks like a prince, just like what JJ had said, and that's not accidental, as far as that goes. But your comparison, Denise, between, Leia in the bikini and, women finding this character attractive, it is such a double standard.
Yeah,
I agree 100%. I mean, they cast an actor who, aside from being a tremendously amazing actor, is somebody who is attractive in an unconventional way. Somebody who, in a lot of his roles, you can see that he has this sexual energy that he brings. And they made him look the best version of himself ever. The best that he can ever look, with tons of makeup and hair products. That was not a coincidence. That was a deliberate thing. When he removes his mask, he looks like a prince. They made him look great. Somehow, if we fans notice that and we happen to be women, then all we care about is some guy who's good looking, even if he's a monster. That's another argument that people throw at Reylo. And that kind of ties into the next criticism point, which is Kylo is too evil to offer anything that Rey could ever want. So she can't like him because he's too evil. Plus, he can never be redeemed, and she will never forgive him for killing her father figure, Han. What do you guys think about that?
I'm hoping for a twist. I think we're going to learn something about him in the next movie, and about Luke, and about what they're doing. And we're going to maybe understand his motivations a little bit more. So that's what I'm hoping for.
I see us getting more of a sympathetic background on Kylo. In order for any of this to work, he has to gain the audience's sympathy. And this trilogy is basically set to the Skywalker family through Rey's eyes as she sees it. So right now, Rey sees Kylo as nothing, but this villain that killed his own father. Well, I think that's going to change, and I think in order for this to work, he has to be getting a more sympathetic backstory as far as when happened with the academy, if you want to call it an academy, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I just think that the sympathy card has to be played. Keep in mind, you know, she has access to his thoughts that nobody else has. That kind of explanation could be very quick. You know, she's been in his mind and she's pulled things. What else has she pulled from him?
Well, I think one important point to make to people who are like not in support of the pairing because of thinking that why would she want him? He's awful. Well, remember, we're not rooting for Rey and Kylo to be a couple as they are now. We're rooting for character development. And that's what we are expecting to see. That's what the movie's pointing towards. And as character development occurs, he won't be the same person that you see capturing girls and tying them to a chair and interrogating them. It's not going to be the same dynamic. That will change. And we're already seeing signs that Rey has seen that vulnerable side of him. And I think it was really telling that they updated that Star Wars databank entry for both of them. How they describe the interrogation scene is basically Rey saw him as a warlord. And then when she goes into his mind, she sees vulnerability, conflict, and pain. She got that glimpse of him. And I think that she had to do what she had to do towards the end of Force Awakens. She was angry at him for killing Han, of course. But I think that now that she's on Act 2, especially if they have a Force connection, she'll get to know a different aspect of him, and he's evolving. So I don't see that his evil in The Force Awakens as an absolute obstacle to them as things progress between them. I just have some like final thoughts on the whole Reylo thing. One of the biggest criticisms that I've heard, one of the most powerful ones, is when people say, if Kylo and Rey end up falling in love with each other, what message is that going to send to little girls and little boys? That it's okay to fall in love with the guy who abuses you? You know, and you hear iterations of that everywhere you go online. But for me, it's exactly the opposite. The message that it would leave for little boys and little girls and for everyone is just a reminder that Star Wars is about the power of love and the importance of being good and the importance of believing in people's power to change, the ability to transform, and the importance of second chances. So I think that if we see Kylo transform, come back of his own will, choose to turn to the light and help to repair the damage that he's done, and then we see Rey develop compassion for him, get to know him, give him a second chance, I think that would be a very powerful message.
Yeah, the overarching message is, you know, like I said, love, hope, and redemption combined with forgiveness, second chances. That is really what I'm hoping for with this trilogy. That concludes part 1 of the Star Wars Connection, Reylo 101. Please email us with questions at starwarsconnection09@gmail.com or find us on Twitter, Instagram, or Tumblr. Don't miss out on the rest of our discussions with part 2 and 3, which can be found on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.